And, if folks have other questions they want to ask me, they should feel free to call me, email me, knock on my door, whatever you prefer.
Right. Okay. Where do you're open to people knocking on your door? Where do you live?
I am, as long as they socially. I knocked on Damien's door. That's how I know Damien.
Oh, okay, cool.
Was it 2 months ago? I mean, I think you were one of the first households that I knocked on. And when I knocked on your door, I was incredibly nervous because I heard Rashida Tlaib and AOC have been knocking on doors, but I hadn't heard anyone in California. And honestly, the fact that AOC was knocking on doors gave me a lot of confidence, because if she was doing it in New York, then I thought, okay, anybody can do this, because New York was the epicenter of this pandemic. And, we're socially distancing. Berkeley's a good place to knock on doors because it's not apartments. It's largely single family homes. But I was still, I don't know if you noticed, Damien, I was a little nervous when I knocked on your door, because I was still
I was nervous to answer it.
So. We all were nervous. But, the evidence shows very clearly that door knocking is still the most effective form of political outreach. I mean, and Doug Brockman, or Dave Brockman, who's our advisor on this campaign at UC Berkeley, has been telling me from day one, if you want to win against an incumbent, you individually have to knock on doors, because it's not just door knocking. Candidate door knocking is the #1 most effective tactic in political outreach. So
that's one of the, I think that's one of the big evils of freezing, representation at, at a magic number of 435.
Yeah.
As you get more and more people in the country, it makes it, it makes it impossible to win that seat by knocking doors.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Now districts are what, 400,000 plus, I think. I don't remember the exact population.
Yeah, it's a big number.
It's ridiculous. But yeah, I given how many doors I've knocked on, it would be pretty hypocritical for me to object to anyone knocking on my door. So if anyone wants to come to 1466 8th Street, knock on my door. I usually have cookies. I'll offer you a cookie, socially distanced. I'll put on my face mask, and we'll chat about the future of Berkeley.
All right, so I'll introduce you because we're recording. So we're talking to Wayne Hsiung, who's running for mayor of Berkeley, and he lives on 8th Street if anyone wants to come knocking on his door. And the folks at Better Berkeley, which is an email group hosted by Google, have put together a list of questions. And so I'm Ken Burland, and I'll play host or MC or whatever here, and I'll ask the questions. So the first question that we have is, in your platform, you're proposing a wealth tax, and you refer to it as that. And so folks want to know, what kind of wealth tax are you proposing? What does that mean? What is a wealth tax? How can Berkeley do something like that?
Yeah, so wealth tax is a tax on someone's total assets, and there have been different versions of this passed across the globe, but the version I think that is going to work is the version that Elizabeth Warren proposed, which is basically no exemptions at all. No exemptions for real estate, paintings, whatever it is. And you estimate the amount of wealth you have, and you pay a percentage of your wealth beyond a certain threshold. And the threshold in Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders' plan, I think, was $50 million and $25 million respectively. Our plan is $10 million. I think Berkeley can be a little more aggressive. And the idea is this: you estimate your net wealth, whatever it is, and you pay a percentage of that total wealth. And so for us, it's 1% between 10 and $20 million, 2% between 20 and 50, and 4% above $50 million, plus another 2% for any billionaires. Although I think there are only a handful of billionaires in Berkeley.
I was going to ask, how many people you think fall into this category in the city of Berkeley?
Yeah. So we don't know for sure. It's hard to say, and I don't think there's good data on this. So what we did was we just did a back of the envelope calculation by looking at Berkeley's total population and assuming Berkeley had the same distribution of wealth as the rest of the nation. And in fact, that's a conservative assumption to make, because Berkeley has higher wealth and higher income than the average resident of the United States of America. So this is a conservative calculation. And we got a range from somewhere between probably 30 million to up to $200 million in revenue if we were to pass this wealth tax in Berkeley. Cities don't do this, right? I don't know if there's a statutory bar in California against cities passing income taxes. I think there might be. There is. Income tax is different than a wealth tax, though.
Okay.
Right? So that's kind of going to be the fight. That's an argument that we actually have to win. And my guess is there's probably going to be some conservative think tank that sues us or finds some resident of Berkeley to sue us. But I'm more than happy to fight that in court. And, as a lawyer myself and a litigator, I think it's going to be a fun case, because I think in California, given that we have so many progressive judges who understand the budget crisis that local governments are facing, and who also understand the shift towards capital in the American economy. I'm a great believer in Emmanuel Saez's and Eddie's work showing that R is greater than G. We've seen a long-term shift away from labor towards capital. And so one of the things that cities and states and nations have to do is start taxing capital more. And so the best way to do that, in my view, is what Emmanuel Saez has said, which is you pass a wealth tax. And I think my experience with judges in politics and legal change is that judges are much more political than they admit themselves to be.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're in a budget crisis, if we're seeing the nation in dire need of something like a wealth tax, we'll be able to get some progressive judges to get on board with it.
How about taxpayers?
So that's the
Do you think
hope.
taxpayers would flee the jurisdiction if they thought they were going to be taxed 1%?
Yeah, so we've got a three-part system set up where we have the wealth tax, a real estate transfer tax we're hoping to increase for houses beyond a certain threshold. So if anyone has $10 million in assets or more, they probably have a home that's worth at least $2 million. I mean, some of them might have smaller homes, but so we're planning to increase the real estate transfer tax on homes that are over $2 million and also impose a vacancy tax on homes that are over $2 million. So if a wealthy person sells their home, we get the real estate transfer tax, we get a new millionaire to come in and pay the wealth tax. If they leave their home vacant, then we have a vacancy tax. So we capture revenue regardless of whether this multimillionaire or billionaire stays in Berkeley or leaves.
All right. So the next question kind of gets into how you spend that money, I suppose. So one of question number 2 says, you've got an audacious goal to end homelessness in the next 5 years by 2025. How do you go about that? How do you accomplish that?
Every expert I've talked to and every research study I've read tells us that we know the answer to homelessness. It's permanent supportive housing. It's a housing first model. I mean, Salt Lake City did this, saw a 90% decline. In Seattle, they did this a little bit. Everywhere they did it, they saw massive declines. In LA, they piloted this. And the Rand Corporation did a great analysis of the project in LA, finding that, again, we saw 90% declines in homelessness, $1.20 saved for every dollar invested. So we know what the answer is. And in Berkeley, we even know how much it would cost to put every homeless person in Berkeley in a permanent supportive housing because the city government has actually done the analysis, and it's somewhere between $30 and $45 million a year. The wealth tax would clearly cover this. And so if we were able to pass the wealth tax, which would probably have to go to the ballot, it would be in 2022, we would instantly have the revenue to put every single resident of Berkeley into permanent supportive housing. Now, there's going to be probably some moral hazard. So, if we get all the people who are currently in Berkeley in his permanent supportive housing, oh my gosh, there's a massive spider on my computer. It's very interesting. I wish I could show you this huge spider. It's fascinating. I've never seen a spider this big in my home.
Wait, how much is permanent supportive housing cost per person per year? What is that number?
Yeah, so it varies a lot. So to construct a unit of permanent supportive housing, the estimate I've seen is $600,000, and that's if you're building new supportive housing.
Right.
If you're converting old housing into permanent supportive housing, and this includes all services. It's like you're constructing it. So because permanent supportive housing isn't just housing, it's also kind of a space where you can have social workers, mental health care professionals, addiction counselors.
Right. So what's the annual once built, what's the annual cost?
Yeah. So the estimate I've seen, and this is from Seattle, is something like $20,000 to $25,000 per unit of housing. So it's not that much once it's been built, but you've got to build it. And that's the hard part in a place like
the numbers I've
where are
seen
we going to find the place to
are
build
north
it?
of 600,000, right? They're
yeah. So
and
I think the answer to where we build it is the same answer that Salt Lake City gave, which is we don't have to necessarily build it in Berkeley. We can take homeless people from Berkeley to surrounding regions if it's funded by Berkeley. Obviously, if homeless people from Berkeley are going to go to, for example, Stockton or Richmond, I don't think Stockton or Richmond are going to take too kindly on that unless there's some funding that Berkeley or the state of California are providing. We should do it, just like Salt Lake City did it. And in Salt Lake City, it was, and this, we should do the same in California. It was a state plan from what I understand. So the state of Utah, the governor of Utah at the time was one of the leaders pushing that intervention to address homelessness in Salt Lake City. And we need to do the same in California. The great thing is the apparatus all already exists. It's just no one has actually put it all together because Gavin Newsom last year passed a $1 billion homelessness bill for local aid for homelessness efforts. And this year, even the pandemic, they only reduced that 25%. I would be much happier if he passed like a 10-year bill and said, we're going to just keep funding this over the next 10 years, because that would make it a lot easier for local governments to have a stable set of finances over the next 10 years. And I think it is basically a 5 to 10-year plan to eradicate homelessness. I set a 90% target in 5 years because I know the research and evidence on goal setting, and setting ambitious goals gets you more results. So I see no reason for us to say, let's shoot for 90% in 5 years. And if we get to 50% in 5 years, that's still historic success in homelessness in the Bay Area, right?
Can you talk a little bit about like the regional elements of the plan? Because
Yeah, I mean,
I think people understand that
yeah.
city borders are porous, and that
Mhm,
if there are
mhm, mhm.
2,000 homeless people in
Yeah,
Berkeley right now, there'll be 4,000
yep, you're
after
right.
we provide permanent supportive housing.
Yeah, yeah, and this is a huge problem in the Bay Area because we've seen so many cities play hot potato with human beings. And Albany, for example, when they were sued by the East Bay Community Law Center a few years ago, they settled and just gave everyone $3,000 and said, leave Albany. And everyone signed a settlement agreement and they all came to Berkeley. And that is actually the origin, a lot of the encampments you see on I-80. I live near the Gilman encampment. That didn't exist in 2016, I think it was, or 2017. It came into existence because Albany paid people to come here, which is a complete waste of money. So too often cities have been wasting money and even wasting city resources. Like Berkeley has been doing the same thing. When we passed the RV ban in Berkeley in 2018, we shoved all the RVs out of Berkeley. We wasted a lot of police resources. We wasted a lot of government resources. And it didn't actually get to the root of the problem because all the RVs just went to Oakland. And Libby Schaaf was furious. And they wasted their police and government resources pushing them back into Berkeley. So regional coordination is absolutely crucial. So my first goal as mayor, and I do this on my first day as mayor, would be to call up every single one of the mayors in East Bay at least, and maybe even in the entire Bay Area, and say, we need to all sit down together and have a regional plan, a long-term vision with strategies, processes, funding requirements for each city, and specific concrete plans, even on a block-by-block basis, saying, when there's a homeless person in this block, where are they going to go? And we're all going to agree on this. And so we don't shove homeless people from one city to the next. And everyone's paying their fair share and taking their fair share of supportive housing. Because, you know, the NIMBYs are always going to complain and say, we don't want supportive housing in our neighborhoods. And for me to go to Berkeley residents and explain why we need at least some supportive housing in Berkeley, I think we should have some. You know, I think most of it can probably be in the outskirts in places that are cheaper than Berkeley to build. But I don't think Stockton and Richmond are going to be happy taking all this supportive housing if we don't build at least some ourselves. So, but if I go to our residents and say, hey, yes, we're going to build some in Berkeley, but this is part of a regional plan that's fair for us because Stockton and Emeryville and El Cerrito and Oakland are all doing some building too, then I think the residents of Berkeley, even the NIMBYs, will come on board. But
so, you know, looking at the incumbents, you know, where have their regional ambitions?
There's no plan at all.
Failed.
There is no plan at all. Jesse is not a long-term thinker, and I think it's partly he just doesn't have, honestly, the capacity. Like he's not someone who's taken on challenging problems. Just frankly, organizing problems, intellectual problems in his life. He's a career politician. The only challenging problems he's faced are elections. That's it. And he's been pretty good at winning elections at the local level, which honestly isn't even that hard. You know, like one of the reasons I think we have a very good chance of winning is because winning local elections isn't that hard. No one even knows the name of the candidate. You know, like 60% of the voters I know have no idea who the mayor is. Please
I
go
want
ahead.
to hear more about your ability to be Jess, but I haven't been in a loop. I thought Jeff Lomax would be on here, but you know about the RVs, because they were the council and Jesse was planning to use some land here and build a permanent RV park.
Yeah.
I don't remember what happened with that because I had to a lot of activities.
Yeah, I think that just ended. They just gave up on it. I think, you know, I mean, it's not easy to get those sorts of arrangements. It takes some relentlessness and energy. And I don't think Jesse has a relentlessness and energy and focus to get these sorts of deals done. And, you know, I mean, like I was a transactional attorney. Oh, go ahead.
They were really gung-ho on this idea, and they were going to do it in the marina, and we protested about that. But anyway, so I don't know what happened with that.
I think, like many things, they just kind of gave up on it. They don't have the energy and focus and relentlessness you need to get a deal struck. And yeah, you've got to strike a deal.
It didn't make financial sense anyway, but
there is a CASA plan. There is a regional plan, actually. And Jesse Aragon is now the head of the president of ABAG, which is the origin of that plan. Have you read that plan?
Yeah, this is a housing plan, not a homelessness plan, right?
Well, it's more than just housing, but that's a big chunk of it. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, ABAG manages the housing kind of the arena for the, you know, each particular city, and each city gets an allotment of housing. What there is not is a set of, I mean, really tactical strategies and like tactical operational details, meaning when there's a homeless person in one city, where does that homeless person go? When there is coordination that's required between the homeless services division of a city like Stockton, where we might be investing in building more supportive housing. And they need to coordinate with the police force in Berkeley that has a homeless person in the back seat of their car. Like these operational details matter. And this is the sort of planning that doesn't exist in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I think that in an election, Jesse is likely to point to his ABAG service and to say that there is a regional plan. So
that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I mean, ABAG does some stuff. It's not particularly effective, and it's not particularly.
No, CASA's a terrible plan. It makes no sense, actually.
Yeah.
But you need to.
I think people are smart enough to see for themselves that homelessness has increased, and his promise in 2016. Honestly, I almost feel if I am in Jesse's position, if we win this election in 2020, and in 2024, I'm in a position where homelessness has increased, and the numbers are not entirely clear, but anywhere from 10 to 40% in the last few years, then I just will not run again. I will resign. I just think, if accountability in politics means anything, then Jesse should just resign, because that was the number one thing he ran on. This is why we voted for him. This is why I voted for him.
Hey, so Wayne, this is Steve. So you didn't mention the county, and you didn't mention HUD, and you didn't mention the whole homeless industrial complex. I mean, there's a ton of money that's circulating that's not within the city's control.
Yeah,
and there's a ton of programs and databases, and all the requirements from that go through Barbara Lee and others who do HUD. And I mean, it's not simple. It's not like we have a few million that the city pitches at it. But getting the mayors together isn't going to solve it unless you have the counties and they talk to HUD.
Of course.
And there's a huge other complex
I don't know if you need HUD. because in Salt Lake City this solved without federal intervention. So I don't think we need the federal department involved. But of course, if we had federal aid, that'd be fantastic. And I mean, one thing that's going to probably help us on homelessness over the next 4 years is if the Senate and the presidency are controlled by Democrats. Many of you probably know that Joe Biden has a plan to expand Section 8 housing to cover everyone who's eligible, right? And that's going to reduce homelessness. There's no doubt about that. Because right now, Section 8 housing is only available for 1/4 of the households that are eligible, which is absurd. Like food is given to every family that needs food. Healthcare, we have Medicaid, and it's not like a lottery where 1/4 of the families that are eligible for Medicaid get Medicaid. Section 8 is a lottery. 1/4 of the families get it, which makes no sense. Because these are kids. I mean, come on, kids.
But Wayne, Section 8 has to be actually offered by landlords. So
that's true.
What reason is there to believe that that's actually going to happen in Berkeley?
Yeah, I mean, we have to use all the tools that we use for other political campaigns.
Okay, but realistically,
yeah.
So looking to the feds, to Biden or whatever, and saying, okay, cool, make that happen. What that means is this is no longer a problem that Berkeley's going to solve. So Jesse's whole thing about ending homelessness, what he's accomplished is ending it everywhere but Berkeley, because they're all here. So that has to stop. That has to stop.
Section 8 housing is not going to end homelessness either. Section 8 housing it's going to prevent homelessness, so our numbers will probably not go up as fast as they otherwise would. But Section 8 housing isn't going to end homelessness because we already have a massive homeless population, and those folks are not going to be using Section 8 housing or likely. I mean, first of all, so many of them at this point have mental health issues.
If you're addicted to meth, you're going to rip the copper out of the wall. Right? You will. If you're addicted to meth, you are going to rip the copper out of the wall, sell it to feed the habit.
Yeah,
so let's just be real about what's going to happen. And
you're right. You're right.
But it cannot be the policy of the city of Berkeley that we're going to take on everyone who comes here.
Yeah, you're right.
Can't do it.
Right.
Hey, I want to interrupt. I want to get back to the questions a little bit because I want to give you, Wayne, a chance to talk about your past successes. I think you're probably most well known for heading direct action everywhere. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as your successes with DXE and what you think your work there helps you bring to this
and while DXE was kind of one of the substantive projects I worked on, I really think my main success is just in community organizing. This is kind of what I've done for 20 years, and it's what I started doing at the University of Chicago in the late 1990s. And frankly, even when I was an academic, I think my most important successes when I was a professor of law at Northwestern were just organizing students to do stuff like pass a fog wall ban in Chicago. And what I learned through all those experiences, and I think the big success I've always had, is identifying people who have talents and letting them loose to go do it, And I think that the best tech companies do this, right? They identify people who have incredible skills, they give them clear objectives, and they let them roll. The best grassroots organizations do this. At Direct Action Ever, the main talent I had was attracting a lot of people like my friend John Fromar, who frankly has no business being an animal rights organizer. I mean, this is a guy who was editor-in-chief of the Oregon Law Review. He went to Stanford. And he was an associate. He was doing quite well for himself at DLA Piper. And somehow he found himself to be an animal rights activist and organizer. So the skill set I have is inspiring people the vision of change and then giving them an objective that then they go and roll with. And I think that's one of the things that's absolutely missing in the city of Berkeley. When you talk to the average bureaucrat or even the average city council person, there's no vision that excites people. There's no sense that I have some ownership over my work, some purpose behind my work that makes me excited to come to work every day. And that's what I want to change. I want every city employee to feel like we're here to take on some globe changing event. And frankly, we are, because the globe is changing right now with climate change, with homelessness. If we can solve some of these problems, we can literally change the world. And that's what I'm going to try and do, infuse the city government with a sense of purpose and a sense of service. And this is the other key element of community organizing that I learned from Michelle Obama 20 years ago. Michelle Obama, unlike Barack Obama, she's not a politician, right? She's an organizer. And the thing, she'd be a good politician if she wanted to be, but she didn't want to be, and she probably never wants to be, because being a politician, I've already learned this the hard way. Jason's going after us hard already and smearing our reputation all sorts of ways that I'm honestly kind of shocked by. But one of the things that she taught us in 1999, when I first started organizing at the University of Chicago Community Service Center, is everyone's got to feel like they've got a piece of the pie. If you're going to be effective at creating change in any organization, you've got to make everyone feel like they are a stakeholder. And it can be a small thing. Maybe it's just they change the text of the mission statement in some small way. Maybe it's they get 1% of the budget. But if everyone feel like they're a stakeholder, you're going to be able to move forward so much more effectively when you're trying to create change at scale. And so that is the skill set I've developed over the last 20 years, giving people a piece of the pie, setting out a vision, creating specific objectives behind that vision, and making sure everyone feels like they have some piece of it, that they have some purpose.
Can I jump in? It makes me a little wary, and I can't speak for anyone else, but I suspect some feel similarly, that I'm a little wary to have so much aspiration in my leaders, in my political leaders. Because I view Berkeley as a small town, and having these super aspirational goals.
I don't know.
I view these super aspirational goals as a little bit of an overreach. In other words, what has brought previous politicians down, because they can't focus on some of the more important things. So just a comment, but that's anyway.
Yeah, look, I agree with you when it's a vague kind of global goal like world peace. I don't think the Berkeley mayor should be saying, I'm going to bring world peace. First of all, they're not going to be able to do it. Second of all, that's not a fast goal. I mean, I think you need specific measurable goals. I'm a great believer in John Doerr's philosophy. I mean, John Doerr and I have nothing in common at all, but his book, Measure What Matters, is an amazing book. And we need very specific goals. So I will tell you what my goals are. And they're aspirational in the sense that they're ambitious goals, but they're also very pragmatic in the sense they matter a lot to the city of Berkeley. And my goals are threefold. We need to get homelessness down 90%. We need to go carbon neutral in 5 years. We need to get the cost of living down by 50%, right? We want the average apartment to be $1,700 instead of $3,400. And we should have dashboards measuring this over time. So these are aspirational goals in the sense that they're big goals, but they're very pragmatic goals in that they relate to the daily lives of the people of the city of Berkeley. If we actually got rents down to $1,700 a month on average in Berkeley, everybody in this community would benefit. If we got to carbon neutrality,
how do you go after that goal? I agree. I mean, I have a dashboard at work. I've got goals, and then I have related to each of the goals, we have projects, and we hope to and we measure how much each project is contributing to the goal. So absolutely. I think that's something that speaks. Low rents is something that speaks to everyone. I think even people who might be categorized as supply siders, thinking more we need more taxpayer. We're going to have better roads when we have more taxpayers. More wealth means we can do more with it. We can do more good when we have a bigger tax base. So what are the projects that lead to us getting the average 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom rent down to $1,700 a month?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple things. One is we need to streamline our building code in Berkeley. It needs to be simplified immensely. And I can't talk through all the details, but I do think that, for example, our ADU process, it takes at least a few months to get an ADU approval in Berkeley. In San Jose, they target 90 minutes, right? Time is money. That's an enormous amount of expense. And we should be going line by line through the city code, figuring out what can be cut, what can be simplified, what approvals are unnecessary, and making sure we move as fast as possible in improving building. Second is zoning. Unlike Jesse, I'm very supportive of SB 50. I'm very supportive of upzoning transit corridors and doing things to make sure we can build more housing. And if we have the cost of housing going down because we streamlined our building code, if we have more housing available because we've streamlined our zoning, then supply increases immensely. And hopefully we're building more of all types of housing. But in particular, I think everyone's most concerned with affordable housing. The third piece of this for me, though, is the Vienna model. And I think that we need, at least to some extent, to start experimenting with social housing. And one of the reasons, the reason I want to pass the wealth tax is basically to address these three goals: carbon neutrality, supportive housing for the homeless, and affordable housing for working class folks. And I think one of the ways we can get affordable housing for working class folks much faster is to have more public housing. And I don't mean public housing like the housing projects in the south side of Chicago when I was an undergraduate. Those places were awful. I mean, looking at a model like Vienna, Austria. And if you haven't read about the Vienna model, it is amazing. Vienna is probably the most affordable, livable city in Europe, or certainly one of them. I think rents in Vienna, despite the fact that costs in Europe in general are much higher than the United States, I believe it's something like a third to half of what they are in the Bay Area. And a lot of it is publicly funded housing. And it doesn't mean the government controls all the housing. It doesn't mean the government is 100% over all the housing, but just taking the profit motive. It's kind of like Medicare for all, but housing for all, right? Where we've realized that there's a social component to housing. Publicly funding some large component of housing will get housing costs down and allow more people to get accessible housing in a market that otherwise might not be able to fulfill the housing needs of the people who live in the city.
So
Wayne,
so I will say,
Wayne, let me jump in here. So
yeah.
Vienna is one centrally governed city.
Mm-hmm.
We are one city in a sea of other cities, which are frankly all over the map, no pun intended, with regard to their response to this issue. So we could build until we run out of oxygen, and people will come to Berkeley. It won't move the prices at all because the demand is external. We can create all the supply we want, but we will not outrun the demand of the entire Bay Area.
Yeah.
So how is that going to bring rents down to the target you described?
Well, my guess is Damien and I would both disagree with that. I don't know. Did you disagree with that, Damien? We can't hear you. You're muted.
The elasticity is important. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about elasticity. I don't know. I tend to agree that it's really tough. I think he's right about that. Unless you get a regional solution, I don't know how you do it just in Berkeley.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. If Berkeley's the only place that's building, but the reality is when we're talking about zoning reform, it's not going to happen at a city level. It's going to happen at the state level. And I think there's a lot of things we should do in zoning reform to improve on what Scott Wiener did. I supported SB 50. If it was the only thing we had, I would have voted for SB 50. I think SB 50 could have been improved. But the zoning reform isn't going to happen at the level of Berkeley. It's going to happen regionally. So it's going to happen across the entire state of California.
You're running for office in Berkeley. So how are you going to make a difference here?
Well, but part of the reason that SB 50 didn't pass is because we had all these regional leaders. We had mayors across, and it was mayors primarily in places like Palo Alto, like rich neighborhoods that didn't want zoning reform, that blocked SB 50 and scared off enough senators that we only got 18 out of the 21 votes we needed.
Sure,
so if you've got champions,
you're still mayor of one city.
Yeah.
The others have not changed. How are your results going to be? Like if we're sitting here in 4 years and this is a promise that you've made and we've made no progress.
Here's one thing I'll say.
Failed. What's the answer?
Let me just clarify. Replacing the head of ABAG, Jesse Arreguín is currently the head of the Association of Bay Area Governments. He would not be the head of the Association of Bay Area Governments if he were not mayor of Berkeley. So replacing that one mayor might have been enough to get SB 50 passed. Again, I don't think SB 50 is perfect. I think there are things we could have done to make it better, but it still would have made a big difference. It would have added millions of units more housing to the state of California, when we know California is 49 out of 50 states in the nation in terms of housing units per population. 49 out of 50. That's not good. That's going to lead to a housing crisis and a housing shortage, guaranteed. Right? So I think if we had a different mayor in Berkeley, that might have been enough to get the 3 votes we needed, because the Association of Bay Area Governments is influential. And
but do you see another bite at the apple coming? Like that's over. That's history.
Scott Wiener is already he's already proposing another upzoning bill that's not quite as ambitious as SB 50. I do think he's going to try again. I think he said he's going to try again. And frankly, I think Gavin Newsom is going to try if Scott Wiener doesn't, because Gavin Newsom's promise to the state of California was building 3.5 million units of housing. He's gotten nowhere near that objective, and he's going to get voted out of office if this housing crisis continues.
So if you want equitable density, you're going to have to overturn the objection of people in the hills who would not be subject to the densification requirements that Wiener demanded because AC Transit doesn't run buses more often than 12 and a half minutes on their circuit. So the story was you're dense if the buses pass through every 10 minutes. So because it's 2.5 minutes longer than that, hills escape.
Yeah, you know, my sense after having talked to I probably talked to 3,000 people now, John, in real substantive conversations in Berkeley, which is, you know, and a pretty good sample of the city of Berkeley is something is shifting. The quote unquote NIMBYism that has driven a lot of Berkeley politics for decades is shifting dramatically because of homelessness, because people realize the path we're on is desperate. It is scary. It is terrifying. And so folks who otherwise would not have been open to ideas like SB 50 are becoming more and more open to them. And I think,
wait a minute, you're saying that people in Sophie Hahn's district are going to welcome Section 8 housing in that area. That's what we're talking about. The answer is Section 8 housing. If the alternative is to have a homeless person. Densification.
Yeah, I think so. If the alternative is to have a homeless person digging through your garbage can and sleeping in your yard, yes. And
that's not happening in that. That's not happening in that district. I was actually
literally knocking on doors in Sophie Hahn's district a couple days ago, and I had multiple voters tell me I had a homeless person digging through my garbage in the middle of the night, and it terrified me. And if we explain to them, and you need leadership to explain this, if we explain to them, if we don't get some housing and zoning reform, that is going to happen at 5 times a higher rate over the next 10 years, then yes, the folks who traditionally, I don't like the NIMBY-YIMBY divide. I don't think it's a useful one because you look at Ezra Klein's research, the more we identify as NIMBYs and YIMBYs, the more we're not going to make progress for NIMBYs or YIMBYs. But the NIMBYism that has existed in Berkeley is shifting, in my view. And there have been polls on this, so this is anecdotal evidence that I'm using from the conversations that I've had. On the other hand, I'm pretty confident I've talked to more Berkeley voters than anyone in the city of Berkeley over the last 6 months, because I've been knocking on doors every single day, starting in the afternoon, all the way as long as I can until it's dark enough that people are pissed off that I'm knocking on their doors. So any other questions? Eric, you've been asking great questions. I just want to make sure other people in this group get a chance to ask questions too.
Wayne, have you looked at Singapore?
I have looked at Singapore a little bit. Yeah. But tell me more your thoughts on Singapore.
Well, Singapore has it has a very worked out public housing strategy. Based on long-term leases of units. It's a success story. It also has a fairly low tax base, actually.
Yeah, it does.
A flat tax on personal and corporate income, both.
Yeah, I know a little bit about Singapore, and one of the projects in Singapore is a project that I'm using as a model for something we could put in West Berkeley, but I don't know as much about the system as a whole and how it all works together. And that's something I should look into more. So thanks for the suggestion.
Yeah, I think it's a better model than Vienna, actually.
Okay.
I mean, more relevant.
Yeah, I would like to ask about defunding the police, about that movement, or that catchphrase or whatever that, and figure out or ask you what that means to you, what that means specifically to Berkeley. What does defund mean and look like to you here?
Yeah. So I am going to be 100% committed to using evidence to assess whether and how much we should defund the police. And the reason I believe in at least partial defunding the police, and I think there's so much confusion about what this means. A lot of people think defunding means you cut the police budget to zero. They think it means you cut it. And so it means different things to different people. But to me, it seems pretty clear that a couple things, assumptions I'm operating under empirically. There is some evidence that having a security presence on the streets reduces crime, right? The more beat cops you have, the more people you have in some sort of uniform driving around. And crime is a concern in Berkeley. There's no question about that. People are concerned about crime, legitimately so. But I'd also add there's some pretty decent evidence. It doesn't have to be armed police. It can be any security presence, including civilian security guards. You can have unarmed civilian security guards driving around in your neighborhoods, and it reduces crime. I think some evidence suggests just as much as police force does, right? And it's cheaper too. So one of the things I think we should be doing is try to find these alternative strategies that allow for security presence in our neighborhoods, and even something as simple as streetlights. I'm talking to an economist at UC Berkeley right now about an empirical study he's doing on just the power of streetlights to reduce crime. And Berkeley doesn't have any streetlights, and just adding more streetlights. And we can even do, one of the things I'd really like to do with the city of Berkeley is Damien's going to be very happy about this. I'd like to do more RCTs, Like an RCT is what's called a randomized controlled trial. And this is the gold standard in the sciences. It's when you want to prove something works. And one thing we could do is if we think streetlights will reduce crime, which I think they do, and I think there's some evidence of it, we could randomly assign precincts to get investments in streetlights and not to get investments in streetlights. And we should get pretty instant results. We probably know within 6 months whether it's working or not, because we'd see crime dropping in the places where there's streetlights and not dropping in the places where there weren't streetlights, right? So, and we should be doing that sort of innovative quantitative work to assess how we can reduce crime while also keeping our community safe. I will say the Berkeley Police Department does have, in my view, a disturbing record of harassment and racial discrimination. In 2018, there was an independent report finding that they were stopping Black people at 5 times a higher rate than white people, and they were not charging these Black people at higher rates. And in my experiences talking to the community members in South and West Berkeley within our Black community, there is widespread fear of the police, and especially among young Black men. You know, they do not feel comfortable with the police, and the 5x higher rate of stoppages has actually led to a decline in trust, which is bad for crime. It's not just bad for that community, it's bad for crime, because if that community does not trust the police, does not call the police, does not believe in the police, then we're going to see more crime. So I think that if we tried things like having civilian security guards or non-armed police officers, you know, the traffic thing that the Berkeley City Council is doing now, I haven't seen a lot of evidence behind this or research behind this, but it seems like an interesting experiment, even if there is no evidence. I think there's, you know, one other jurisdiction, maybe I think it's in New York they've done this, but they have basically civilian officers handling traffic that are still part of the police department. In Berkeley, we're proposing a completely separate Department of Transportation. So they're not even part of the police department. It's not just they're civilians who are not even connected to the police department. So this will be a step further than what New York has done. But I think these sorts of experiments are worth trying, given that we know our Black community especially, but frankly, our entire community is deeply concerned about police harassment and police brutality. So for me, what we've suggested is let's take about $20 million away from policing and invest in other sorts of services, whether it's unarmed civilian security guards, streetlights, mental health care, other things that may frankly be even more cost effective in reducing crime and will address other problems in our community. So that's what I'd like to do. And the exact figure is negotiable. I don't want to say an exact number because, you know, I'm a great believer in that before you make a big change, you talk to the people on the front lines. And so I would want to talk to our police officers. I want to talk to our police chief. I want to talk to our community members who face police harassment before deciding the exact figure. I do think our police department is overfunded though, because
so Wayne, there were a ton of problems with that 2018 study. So I'm not going to tear it down for you here.
Fair enough. Share with them.
Wait, let me finish.
More about them.
What is your question? What is your plan rather for making not just an anecdotal, you know, I want to talk to this person, that person decision, but a data-driven decision? Because we have enough people.
Well, one is we have to start taking data, right? I mean, so for example, on police stoppage, you know, in theory, after that 2018 study, my understanding, there was supposed to be a data portal where our police force was going to be releasing publicly to scientists like Damien, you know, so they could study it.
Yeah, there is. It's
stoppage data. But they were not actually releasing it. Every time I checked it.
The stop data went up last month. I've been doing analysis on it ever since.
Okay, last month, but I think there was like a 6-month period where they're not releasing it. And that was
they do 6-month refreshes on one data set. They do daily refreshes on 2.
Okay, interesting.
So stop data there.
Maybe I'm misinformed.
You're going to be in office. You have to commit to making data-driven decisions.
Yeah, I agree.
We elected Rashi for that. She hasn't done anything. She was, I'm going to make data-driven. You know,
the difference between Rashi and me is I'm a former data scientist. That's what I did in my profession.
Okay, well, what I heard was anecdotes. So I want to make sure you're actually going to reason from
Eric, I don't think it's possible for me not to ask John Fromar. He's been working with me for how long now, John? 7 years. Is it possible for me to not make data-driven decisions? I don't think it's possible because this is just the way my brain operates. When I was a kid, when I played video games, I would make spreadsheets and do simulation models and figure out, you know, what attributes I needed to add to my characters to make sure I maximize the outputs. So this is the way I'm going to operate because it's the way my parents were both scientists and mathematicians. I have never thought about the world in a non-data-driven way.
Great.
So
okay, so
you
one
might
more
have
question
different terminal values. So you might have a value. You might value safety more, and I might value
I get
discrimination
we're
more.
optimizing for different problems.
Yeah, but we might be optimizing on different values. But I will make data-driven decisions, and I'll be very clear as to what my values are. So if you disagree with my values,
so let me jump in on something here.
Eric, can we just give some other people a chance to chime in too?
Let me just put one more thing out there, and then I'll shut up.
Please go ahead.
So the data that we have from the police is actually the best data available. The rest of the data systems in the city are dinosaurs. The budgeting system is 35 years old and is no longer maintained. There are critical areas where you will be data blind. Yeah. What's the plan?
Well, we have to improve our infrastructure, first of all. I mean, everything from our website. I mean, the Berkeley City government's website does not have responsive design. You cannot read it on a mobile device. I mean, so we have to make an investment in improving our infrastructure. And, every organization I've been part of, like, I'm not saying we have to invest like $1 billion into making like a Google-worthy set of dashboards and like, watch the way people's mouses are moving on their computers when they're employees. I mean, that's too much. But we need to do some 80-20 stuff. Like, let's do 20% of the work in improving our infrastructure so we can get 80% of the value in tracking our results. And if we don't track our results, there's no point in doing anything. Like in every organization I've been a part of, if you don't measure your results, you're not going to make progress. You're not even going to know whether the strategy you're using is the right strategy. You're not. So we have to have at least enough in place that we can start measuring what matters.
Sure. The people you'll rely on to do that are union employees.
Well, let's get some grad students from Cal to do it. I know a lot of them. Let's get some grad students from MIT. I can go to some of my former professors. There's a lot of people who would love to do this for free.
The union will object to scabs, but okay, let's have somebody else talk.
Okay. Any other questions? By the way, this is really fun. Eric, are you a data scientist?
Yeah, I run an anti-fraud data organization, so I was made to understand the
that
city.
Sounds awesome. That sounds awesome. I'd love to hear more about your work and get your help. Maybe you can be one of the volunteers. One of the scabs we hire. Or not hire.
I love working for free too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'll jump in, Wayne. This is Steve. So
Sure.
one of the things I learned over the last couple of years when I started to pay attention to Berkeley was that the charter doesn't give the council the kind of authorities you're talking about.
Yeah.
All that authority rests in the city manager.
I know.
And then things like Eric was starting to allude to, and I actually followed the budget process last year pretty closely, and it's a sham. It's a bunch of made up numbers. They know it.
Yeah.
And that's what the council gets presented as their menu, and they mess around with about $1 million or $2 million on the edge and say that they've done something.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, 98% of it or 99 passes straight through.
Yeah.
And the union is there. The union reps are there. HR, and it's a hideously complex process. The point is, what do you think the council could even do about that? Really, I firmly actually believe, Jesse and the council have not opened up honestly to residents how little power they have.
Yeah, well, you got to get a city manager in place who's going to work with the team. And from what I understand in Berkeley history, usually mayoral elections are an opportunity to replace the city manager. And I don't want to commit to replacing Dee until I've gotten a chance to talk to her, but I'd say there's like a 99% chance she's gone if we win. And we'll have the mandate to do that with the city council if we win the mayoral election. And my plan is to get a city manager in place. And again, I mean, there's going to be some political obstacles to this, but I think we can do it. He's going to work very, very tight with me and basically de facto convert the city manager into a democratically accountable office by merging the mayor's office and the city manager's office. So we're thinking in mind meld. Now, can we get the city council to improve somebody like that? I mean, we'll see. It probably depends on how big the victory is. If we win by 30 points, then the city council will do it because we'll have proven that we have the grassroots capacity to shake up not just the mayoral election, but every city council election for the future. And I'm not saying that's not outside the realm of possibility. I think it's possible we win a 30-point victory, partly because Jesse isn't campaigning. He doesn't realize we've knocked on 20,000 doors and made 10,000 phone calls and have 200 volunteers. He does know we have more money than he does, which I think is very surprising to him. He didn't think we'd have more money than he does, but we do. But I think if we have the city manager who's very aligned to the mayor's office, and suddenly we can convert our charter from a weak mayor system to a strong mayor system, and the mayor and the city council have a lot more power to do some of the things I think we need to do. In the long term, I am pretty supportive of the idea that we should change to a strong mayor system because, I mean, I almost don't think it's a strong mayor system. I like to think of it as an accountable city manager system. Right now, we have a system where the chief executive officer of the city of Berkeley is not democratically accountable to anyone, except the city council. And the city council is too busy fighting with themselves to actually properly supervise what the city manager is doing. So in the long term, I think having some sort of shift to our charter towards a strong mayor system or having the city manager be appointed just by the mayor makes a lot of sense. But in the short term, my hope is we get a city manager in office who's very aligned with me, who basically I expect to work hand in hand, glove in hand with what I'm trying to do.
Since we're blowing up the city charter, are you okay with going back to at-large council, or do you feel we should stay districted?
I have not been asked that question. Is this being proposed?
By me.
Oh, just right now?
It's out there.
I think it's the right thing to do.
I'd want to hear the arguments for and against. This is the first I've heard that, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Instinct
Okay.
would be to say probably yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, yeah,
Because I
something
think
to look into.
it would eliminate some of the kind of the narrow-mindedness we see in the city council, right?
Yep.
Where
Very
everyone's
provincial.
looking out for one neighborhood. But I want to hear the arguments on the other side too.
Sure. Okay.
I've got to go in 3 minutes, unfortunately. So does anyone else who hasn't gotten a chance to ask me a question have a question?
Yeah, why do you think you can win?
Well, we've raised 5 times as much money as Jesse. We have hundreds more volunteers than he does. And we're using an evidence-based strategy to actually win. When evidence has not been very commonly used in Berkeley local elections, because local elections are not usually being run by people who are particularly sophisticated. I'm not saying, I'm humble about what I don't know. And there's a lot about Berkeley politics that I don't know. I don't know anything about endorsements. Jesse's going to get all these endorsements. And the evidence shows that endorsements do matter. So,
Yeah.
obviously matters a lot too. I'm actually more famous than Jesse is worldwide, but in Berkeley, Jesse's definitely more famous than we are. And a lot of people are going to check the box just because they see his name and face. A lot of people are going to get an email from the Berkeley Democratic Club or the Berkeley Progressive Alliance, none of whom are probably
most germane. They'll endorsement.
Sorry, say again?
I think that's really germane. They'll look at the endorsements.
Yeah.
People aren't going to pay. They'll look at the
Yeah, but we're getting some important endorsements too. So Jesse's single most important endorsement in 2016 just endorsed us yesterday. So, and that is Gus Newport, the former mayor of Berkeley, who got Bernie Sanders to support Jesse. Gus's endorsement was probably the single most endorsement, and Gus is now endorsing us. So we're getting some endorsements that matter, and I'm going to continue to work on them. But, 80-20, I think the value of me doing more canvassing is probably more valuable than me working really hard to get endorsements against an incumbent mayor among people who are very parochial and traditional, So like the machine is the machine, and it's going to be hard for us to overcome that. But yeah, partly is I also just think that Jesse hasn't inspired many people. He's not, he's like a reasonably smart guy, but he has no vision, and he doesn't have like the sort of drive and energy and intelligence that I think people in Berkeley really want in our city government right now. And not to toot my own horn, but I think I do.
All right. Well, you've been really generous with your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We definitely want to let you go. Yeah.
And this has been super fun. Like I really enjoyed these questions. These were by far the smartest. Not that I've gotten dumb questions. I've gotten a lot of smart questions from other people too. But these are definitely the smartest questions I've received. So your group is awesome. I love this.
Well, we appreciate the time, and it was well spent. Thank you.
Yeah, when we win, and I'm going to say when we win, not if we win. When we win, power of positive thinking. When we win, I'd like to continue meeting with you all and make sure we make some progress. And if you all can help out the campaign, contribute financially. We can only take $50. If you donate $50, it's matched 6x because we're taking public financing. And if you want to help us out, make some phone calls, knock on some doors of us. Come join me. You can knock on doors of me. It will be socially distanced. It'll be very safe. And you'll see politics at work on the streets. Okay?
All right. Sounds like fun.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Hey, Ken, thanks to you too.
Good night,
Right,
everybody.
thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Bye,
a lot of
everyone.
fun. Good night.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Ken.
you.
Really
Bye.
appreciate it.